Hello, very happy to have you here with me for another study on Plotinus. This time we're discussing Ennead 1, Tractate 3, titled Dialectic. And in this tractate, Plotinus is exploring how we can use dialectic to uncover objective truths, to structure our ideas of reality, and the three main paths that people take to get there. Let's jump right into it. What art is there? What method? What discipline to bring us there where we must go? The term at which we must arrive we may take as agreed. We have established elsewhere by many considerations that our journey is to the good, to the primal principle, and indeed the very reasoning which discovered the term was itself something like an initiation. But what order of beings will attain the term? Surely, as we read, those that have already seen, or most things, those who at their first birth have entered into the life germ, from which is to spring a metaphysician, a musician, or a born lover, the metaphysician taking to the path by instinct, the musician and the nature peculiarly susceptible to love needing outside guidance. But how lies the course? Is it alike for all, or is there a distinct method for each class of temperament? For all there are two stages of the path, as they are making upwards or have already gained the upper sphere. The first degree is the conversion from the lower life, the second held by those that have already made their way to the sphere of the intelligibles, have set as it were a footprint there, but must still advance within the realm, lasts until they reach the extreme hold of the place, the term attained when the topmost peak of the intellectual realm is won. Plotinus believes in these three main archetypes or classes of temperament, and he believes that these are different starting points on how people are naturally inclined to engage with reality. So these three types being the musician, the born lover, and the metaphysician. And he believes that there are two stages of the path upwards to the upper sphere. So the first is a path requiring, or a stage requiring disengagement and conversion from the lower life. And then the second stage is advancement through the intelligibles until reaching the topmost peak of the intellectual principle. But this highest degree must bide its time. Let us first try to speak of the initial process of conversion. We must begin by distinguishing the three types. Let us take the musician first and indicate his temperamental equipment for the task. The musician we may think of as being exceedingly quick to beauty, drawn in a very rapture to it. Somewhat slow to stir of his own impulse, he answers at once to the outer stimulus, as the timid are sensitive to noise, so he to tones and the beauty they convey. All that offends against unison or harmony in melodies or rhythms repels him. He longs for measure and shapely pattern. This natural tendency must be made the starting point to such a man. He must be drawn by the tone, rhythm, and design in things of sense. He must learn to distinguish the material forms from the authentic, existent which is the source of all these correspondences and of the entire reasoned scheme in the work of art. He must be led to the beauty that manifests itself through these forms. He must be shown that what ravished him was no other than the harmony of the intellectual world and the beauty in that sphere, not some one shape of beauty, but the all beauty, the absolute beauty, and the truths of philosophy must be implanted in him to lead him to faith in that which, unknowing it, he possesses within himself. What these truths are we will show later. The musician is drawn to tones, melodies, harmonies, aesthetics, any kind of composition of beauty, and has an ear for when things, an ear and an eye for when things are jarring, when things aren't congruent. They don't work together. And what the musician has to learn, according to Plotinus, is that these patterns and schemes that make up these tones and beats that agree with each other and are so pleasing, these formulaic patterns all come from the authentic existent, and to decipher the authentic existent from these material sensory forms, and even further to recognize that these patterns that they love so much, these aesthetics, these melodies, these formulas, are nothing more than a reflection of the harmony found in the ideal forms and the intellectual principle and the all beauty, as Plotinus puts it. The born lover, to whose degree the musician also may attain, and then either come to a stand or pass beyond, has a certain memory of beauty, but severed from it now, he no longer comprehends it. Spellbound by visible loveliness, he clings amazed about that. His lesson must be to fall down no longer in bewildered delight before some one embodied form. He must be led under a system of mental discipline to beauty everywhere and made to discern the one principle underlying all, a principle apart from the material forms, springing from another source, and elsewhere more truly present. The beauty, for example, in a noble course of life and in an admirably organized social system, may be pointed out to him. A first training, this is the loveliness of the immaterial. He must learn to recognize the beauty in the arts, sciences, virtues. Then these severed and particular forms must be brought under the one principle by the explanation of their origin. From the virtues he is to be led to the intellectual principle, to the authentic existent. Thence onward he treads the upward way. The born lover is someone who is drawn to the beauty of a particular thing, like the beauty of a person or a romantic relationship. And they first have to learn to universalize their love, to see the beauty in everything, to expand this passion that they have towards one particular thing. So, for example, see beauty in arts and sciences and nature, and from there recognize that the one principle, the beauty in everything, has its ideal forms in the intellectual principle, and then to the authentic existent, and continue upward. The metaphysician is equipped by that very character, winged already and not, like those others, in need of disengagement, stirring of himself towards this supernal, but doubting of the way needs only a guide. He must be shown then and instructed, a willing wayfarer, by his very temperament, all but self-directed. Mathematics, which as a student by nature he will take very easily, will be prescribed to train him to abstract thought and to faith in the unembodied. A moral being by native disposition, he must be led to make his virtue perfect. After the mathematics, he must be put through a course in dialectic and made an adept in this science. The metaphysician takes a much clearer path, as they're a thinker. They're already in this intellectual principle, and they are a moral being by native disposition. But that doesn't mean that the path is clear for them. They could still use some guidance. So Plotinus says that the metaphysician will take to mathematics very easily, and that through mathematics he can train himself in abstract thought, and through that, faith in the unembodied. So I think of it as like these, seeing these patterns in the universe, but also forming some faith in them through paralleling them with math and science. And then he must perfect his virtue, and then after mathematics he must be put through a course in dialectic and made an adept in that science. And he explains this dialectic science in much more detail in this next section. But this science, this dialectic, essential to all three classes alike, what in sum is it? It is the method or discipline that brings with it the power of pronouncing with final truth upon the nature and relation of things, what each is, how it differs from others, what common quality all have, to what kind each belongs, and in what rank each stands in its kind, and whether its being is real being, and how many beings there are, and how many non-beings to be distinguished from beings. Dialectic treats also of the good and the not good, and of the particulars that fall under each, and of what is the eternal and what the not eternal, and of these it must be understood not by seeming knowledge, sense knowledge, but with authentic science. All this accomplished, it gives up its touring of the realm of sense and settles down in the intellectual cosmos, and there plies its own peculiar act. It has abandoned all the realm of deceit and falsity, and pastures the soul in the meadows of truth. It employs the Platonic division to the discernment of the ideal forms of the authentic existence and of the first kinds or categories of being. It establishes in the light of intellection the affiliations of all that issues from these firsts until it has traversed the entire intellectual realm. Then, by means of analysis, it takes the opposite path and returns once more to the first principle. Now it rests, instructed and satisfied as to being in that sphere. It is no longer busy about many things. It has arrived at unity, and it contemplates. It leaves to another science all that coil of premises and conclusions called the art of reasoning, much as it leaves the art of writing some of the matter of logic. No doubt it considers necessary to clear the ground, but it makes itself the judge. Here, as in everything else where it sees use, it uses. Anything it finds superfluous, it leaves to whatever department of learning or practice may turn that matter to account. Dialectic is then used to find objective truths through the use of discernment, comparing and contrasting things. For example, what each thing is, what's common between things, what's different between things, of what kind each belongs, and what the hierarchy, where they are in their hierarchy, the good, not good, what's eternal, not eternal. And so you categorize these things, you break them down into their most base parts, which would be where he says employing the Platonic division to the discernment of the ideal forms of the authentic existence and of the first kinds. Let me pull up my notes really quick, because that's him describing breaking things down to their most base parts. So, their ideal forms, what they are at their most perfect state, authentic existence, and then the first kinds, which is the most primal foundation of a form. And there are four different first kinds. So that's being, motion, rest, identity, and difference. Sorry, 5, not 4. And so when you've broken things down into their most base parts, and you have filtered out the true from the false, and you understand things completely, you return again to the first principle. And even more so, you must become a judge and decide what is useful and use it, and what is superfluous that you can leave behind. But whence does this science derive its own initial laws? The intellectual principle furnishes standards, the most certain for any soul that is able to apply them. What else is necessary? Dialectic puts together for itself, combining and dividing until it has reached perfect intellection. For, we read, it is the purest perfection of intellection and contemplative wisdom, and being the nobler method and science that exists, it must needs deal with authentic existence, the highest there is, as contemplative wisdom or true knowing. It deals with being as intellection with what transcends being. What then is philosophy? Philosophy is the supremely precious. Is dialectic then the same as philosophy? Is it the precious? It is the precious part of philosophy. We must not think of it as the mere tool of the metaphysician. Dialectic does not consist of bare theories and rules. It deals with verities. Existences are, as it were, matter to it, or at least it proceeds methodically towards existences and possesses itself at the one step of the notions and of the realities. Untruth and sophism it knows, not directly, not of its own nature, but merely as something produced outside itself, something which it recognizes to be foreign to the verities laid up in itself. In the falsity presented to it, it perceives a clash with its own canon of truth. Dialectic, that is to say, has no knowledge of propositions, collections of words, but it knows the truth, and in that knowledge knows what the schools call their propositions. It knows above all the operation of the soul, and by virtue of this knowing, it knows too what is affirmed and what is denied, whether the denial is of what was asserted or of something else, and whether propositions agree or differ. All that is submitted to it, it attacks with the directness of sense perception, and it leaves petty precisions of process to what other science may care for such existences. Plotinus describes dialectic as the supremely precious part of philosophy because it enables the soul to move beyond the sensory world and engage with the intellectual principle to access objective truth. And he explains that this isn't done by bare theories and rules, collections of words, or propositions, but instead dealing with verities. And verities are the eternal, unchanging truths that reside in the intellectual principle. This is all done by that dialectic science that we were talking about earlier in this tractate. Categorizing forms and their relations, discerning truths, Platonic division, distinguishing real being from non-being, meaning the eternal forms in the intellectual principle versus the transient material things. And then I think I forgot to mention it previously, but a big part of that is contemplation. So he describes this meadows of truth, and that you settle your soul in the meadows of truth, and you contemplate on the forms until you achieve perfect intellection. Philosophy has other provinces, but dialectic is its precious part. In its study of the laws of the universe, philosophy draws on dialectic much as other studies and crafts use arithmetic, though of course the alliance between philosophy and dialectic is closer. And in morals too, philosophy uses dialectic. By dialectic it comes to contemplation, though it originates of itself the moral state, or rather the discipline from which the moral state develops. groups. Our reasoning faculties employ the data of dialectic almost as their proper possession, for their use of data commonly involves matter as well as form. And while the other virtues bring the reason to bear upon particular experiences and acts, the virtue of wisdom, i.e., the virtue peculiarly induced by dialectic, is a certain super reasoning much closer to the universal, for it deals with such abstract ideas as correspondence and sequence, the choice of time for action and inaction, the adoption of this course, the rejection of that other. Wisdom and dialectic have the task of presenting all things as universals and stripped of matter for treatment by the understanding. But can these inferior kinds of virtue exist without dialectic in philosophy? Yes, but imperfectly and inadequately, and it is possible to be a proficient, a master in dialectic without these lower virtues. It would not happen. The lower will spring either before or together with the higher, and it is likely that everyone normally possesses the natural virtues from which, when wisdom steps in, the perfected virtue develops. After the natural virtues, then, wisdom, and so the perfecting of the moral nature. Once the natural virtues exist, both orders, the natural and the higher, ripen side by side to their final excellence, or as the one advances, it carries forward the other towards perfection. But ever the natural virtue is imperfect in vision and in strength, and to both orders of virtue the essential matter is from what principles we derive them. Here, Plotinus is summarizing dialectic's use, that it's the precious part in philosophy's study of the laws of the universe, and in its study of morals, and that dialectic is important in the developing of the virtue wisdom. And he quotes, "Wisdom and dialectic have the task of presenting all things as universals and stripped of matter for treatment by the understanding," and that wisdom is used to perfect the moral nature and perfect virtue itself. Alright, let me end by going through my notes to make sure there's nothing important that I should mention before we close out. While the intellectual principle contains objective truth, the human soul, being immersed in the sensory world, cannot directly access it without a method. Dialectic is the disciplined process that trains the soul to ascend from the sensory to the intellectual realm. Plotinus describes dialectic as combining and dividing until it reaches perfect intellection, meaning it systematically analyzes and synthesizes concepts to align the soul with the eternal forms in the intellectual principle, enabling it to align with the intellectual principle standards of truth, much like a lens that brings a blurry image into focus. As the soul practices dialectic, it becomes more virtuous. As it becomes more virtuous, it engages in dialectic more effectively, creating a virtuous cycle that propels it towards the divine. And with that, I just want to say thank you for being here, watching to the end. The next one is the fourth tractate, which is happiness. I'm really excited for this one, but it will be a longer one and a more involved one. So, yep, hopefully I'll see you there. Until next time.